Maybe it's better if you stay upstairs tonight, Evelyn, my daughter-in-law said as 25 strangers carried wine bottles and suitcases through my front door like they already owned the place. I stood there holding a pecan pie from Miller's Bakery, the cold December wind slipping through the open doorway behind me while Brittany Harper laughed with her cousins in my living room. Someone I had never met was hanging a stocking over my fireplace. Another woman was pouring eggnog into the crystal glasses my husband Harold bought for our 25th anniversary. And right in the center of it all stood my son Ryan, smiling nervously like none of this was strange. I'm 68 years old, and until that Christmas Eve I believe there were still some lines families didn't cross. The house smelled like cinnamon candles and roasted turkey, but underneath it was another scent now. Perfume. Too many perfumes blending together. Loud voices bouncing off walls that used to know silence. I closed the front door carefully behind me and held the pie tighter against my chest. I didn't realize we were expecting company, I said quietly. Brittany looked over her shoulder with the same bright smile she always used when she was pretending to be sweet. Oh, I thought Ryan told you. My family's staying here through New Year's. Her family. 25 people. Sleeping bags already spread across my den. Coats piled over the staircase Harold built with his own hands 32 years ago. Someone's toddler was smearing chocolate across the piano bench. I looked at Ryan waiting for him to say something. Anything. It's only for a week, Mom, he said, avoiding my eyes. Hotels were too expensive this close to Christmas. A week. I stared at the garland hanging crooked above the fireplace and suddenly remembered another Christmas in this same room years ago. Harold dancing badly to Bing Crosby while snow fell outside. Ryan as a little boy asleep under the tree in footed pajamas. Warmth. Peace. Home. But the room in front of me now felt like a hotel lobby I hadn't agreed to rent out. Brittany walked over and took the pie from my hands without asking. Perfect, she said brightly. We needed another dessert. Then she lowered her voice just enough for only me to hear. And it's probably easier if your side of the family stays upstairs tonight. My Aunt Linda snores, so we're giving her the downstairs guest room. Your side of the family. I felt something inside me go still. Not broken. Just still. Like a lake freezing over in the middle of winter. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. It's just temporary, Mom. Temporary. Funny how disrespect always introduces itself with that word. I nodded slowly and stepped further into the house. Nobody noticed I'd spent 6 hours cooking. Nobody asked if I was tired. Nobody asked where I planned to sleep while strangers occupied every corner of the first floor. Near the kitchen, I spotted a man sitting in Harold's recliner with his shoes on the footrest. He didn't even look up at me. Brittany clapped her hands loudly. Everybody. Evelyn's finally home. A few people waved politely before turning back to football and cocktails. Home. The word barely meant anything anymore. I walked quietly toward the hallway and paused beside the Christmas tree Harold and I planted in our yard as a sapling the year Ryan turned 10. Every ornament carried a memory. Summer vacations. School plays. Family traditions that suddenly felt foolish for protecting so carefully. Behind me, laughter exploded from the dining room. Someone turned the music louder. And standing there beside the glowing tree lights, I realized the cruelest part wasn't that Brittany had brought 25 relatives into my house without asking me. It was that my own son had watched it happen and decided my comfort mattered least of all. I barely slept that night. The guest room upstairs had once been Ryan's childhood bedroom, but Brittany had redecorated it years ago in shades of gray and beige that looked like pages from a furniture catalog. The old baseball trophies were gone. Harold's framed photo from Ryan's Little League championship had disappeared too. In its place sat a scented candle and a stack of fashion magazines nobody read. I lay awake listening to footsteps below me long after midnight. Cabinet doors opening. Ice clinking into glasses. Loud laughter rolling through the floorboards of the house Harold spent half his life paying for. Around 2 in the morning, someone started singing Christmas songs off-key in the kitchen. Another voice shouted for more bourbon. I stared at the ceiling and realized nobody had once asked if the noise might bother me. The strange thing about disrespect is that it rarely arrives all at once. Comes slowly. Quietly. So quietly you keep explaining it away until one day you wake up feeling like a visitor inside your own life. Brittany had not always been cruel. At least not openly. When Ryan first brought her home 12 years ago, she wore pearl earrings and brought me lemon bars from a bakery downtown. She called me Miss Evelyn and complimented my cooking every Sunday. Harold liked her immediately. He said she had ambition. "That girl knows exactly what she wants," he told me once while washing dinner dishes beside me. At the time I thought that was a compliment. Looking back now, I realize it was a warning. The changes started small after their wedding. Brittany insisted the floral wallpaper in the dining room looked dated. A month later, painters arrived while I was visiting my sister in Milwaukee. The wallpaper Harold and I had picked together in 1994 was gone by the time I came home. Then came the kitchen. Brittany reorganized every cabinet because she said my system did not make sense. Suddenly I could not find my own measuring cups in my own house. She replaced family photos with abstract art that looked like spilled paint. One afternoon I noticed she had packed away Harold's old Christmas Village collection because it clashed with the modern aesthetic. I remember holding one tiny ceramic church in my hands while she smiled sympathetically at me from the doorway. "It is just stuff, Evelyn," she said gently. But it was never just stuff. It was memory, tradition, proof that Harold had existed in these rooms. After he passed away last spring, the changes came faster. Brittany started hosting brunches for her friends without asking me first. Women I did not know sat around my dining table discussing ski trips and real estate while I quietly made coffee in the kitchen like hired help. Ryan never noticed the look on my face. Or maybe he noticed and chose silence because silence was easier. That Christmas morning, I finally went downstairs around 6:30. The house smelled like burnt coffee and cinnamon rolls. Empty wine glasses covered the living room tables. Wrapping paper already littered the floor beneath the tree even though nobody had waited for me to wake up before opening gifts. Brittany's mother sat in Harold's recliner wearing his old plaid blanket around her shoulders. She smiled politely at me. "Good morning, Evelyn. We started without you because the children were excited. Started without me. In my own home." I nodded slowly and walked toward the kitchen. Through the window above the sink, snow covered the backyard in soft white layers. Harold used to shovel that patio before sunrise every Christmas morning so Ryan could run outside and build snowmen before breakfast. I wrapped my hands around a cold coffee mug sitting forgotten beside the sink and understood something painful with perfect clarity. Nobody had pushed me out all at once. They had simply made smaller and smaller spaces for me to exist until there was almost nothing left. By Christmas afternoon, the house no longer sounded like a home. It sounded like a crowded restaurant where nobody knew my name. Children ran through the hallways with sticky fingers while football blared from 3 different televisions. Every countertop in my kitchen was covered with open chip bags, casserole dishes, half-empty soda cans, and crumpled napkins. I stood quietly at the sink peeling potatoes nobody had asked me to make because old habits are hard to break. For 40 years, Christmas had belonged to me and Harold. We woke before sunrise, brewed cinnamon coffee, and cooked together while Nat King Cole played softly through the house. Harold always burned the first batch of bacon because he got distracted talking to Ryan. Every year I pretended to be annoyed even though secretly I loved hearing them laugh together in the kitchen. But this Christmas felt different in a way I could not ignore anymore. The traditions were still there on the surface, but somehow none of them belonged to me now. Around 3 o'clock I carried a tray of fresh cookies into the living room and stopped when I heard Brittany speaking near the staircase. "Honestly, once we redo the downstairs, this place could look incredible," she said casually. I stayed still behind the hallway wall without meaning to listen, but then another woman laughed softly and asked, "Will Evelyn even stay here much longer?" There was a pause. Then Brittany answered in the same cheerful voice people use while discussing weather forecasts. "Probably not. Ryan and I have already talked about smaller places for seniors nearby. Something low maintenance." A few women hummed approvingly. One of them said, "Well, this house is way too big for one person anyway." I looked down at the cookie tray trembling slightly in my hands. Smaller places for seniors. As if I were a piece of furniture being relocated after the holidays. As if the home Harold and I built together was already theirs to redesign. I waited for Ryan's voice. I kept hoping to hear him say, "That is my mother you are talking about." But he never spoke. Maybe he was not even in the room. Or maybe silence had simply become easier for him than loyalty. I walked back into the kitchen before anyone saw me standing there. My chest felt strangely calm. Not numb exactly. More like something inside me had finally stopped fighting reality. I placed the cookies beside the dessert table where nobody noticed I had brought them. Brittany's cousin immediately grabbed 3 onto a paper plate without looking at me. Near the dining room, I saw Harold's old armchair pushed awkwardly into a corner to make room for extra folding tables. Someone had tossed coats over the back of it like it was storage space. I carefully removed a heavy winter jacket from the chair and folded it neatly over the banister. Then I rested my hand against the worn leather armrest for a moment. Harold used to sit there every evening reading mystery novels while snow fell outside the windows. Sometimes he would look up and smile at me across the room for no reason at all. Just smile because I was there. "Grandma?" a quiet voice said behind me. I turned and found Chloe standing near the hallway holding a paper cup of hot chocolate. At 19, she was taller now than I remembered, with Ryan's eyes and Harold's thoughtful expression. Unlike everyone else in the house, she looked uncomfortable. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. It was such a small question, for simple words. But suddenly I realized she was the only person who had asked me that all day. I smiled gently and touched her arm. "I am fine, sweetheart." But Chloe glanced toward the crowded living room and lowered her voice. "This does not feel right, Grandma. Mom invited way too many people. Dad keeps pretending everything is normal." I looked at her carefully then. Really looked at her. And for the first time all weekend I realized someone else could see it too. Someone else understood that I was slowly disappearing inside my own home, while everyone around me acted as though it was perfectly reasonable. That evening I escaped to the garage just to hear silence again. The noise inside the house had become unbearable by dinner. Every room echoed with conversations that had nothing to do with me. People talking over one another while paper plates piled up beside the sink I had scrubbed every night for decades. I sat on an old folding chair near Harold's workbench with a wool blanket wrapped around my shoulders and listened to the muffled laughter coming through the walls. The garage smelled faintly of cedar, motor oil, and sawdust. Harold's scent still lingered there if you paid attention. His tools remained exactly where he left them last spring. The red toolbox. The fishing rods hanging neatly above the shelves. The coffee mug stained dark from years of use. Unlike the rest of the house, nothing in the garage had been touched by Brittany's endless need to modernize everything. It felt like the last honest room I had left. A soft knock startled me. Chloe stepped inside carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "I figured you might be cold out here," she said gently. I smiled and accepted the mug carefully between my hands. "Thank you, sweetheart." She sat beside me on an overturned storage bin and glanced toward the door leading back into the house. Even through the thick walls we could still hear shouting from a football game on television, and Brittany laughing loudly above everyone else. Chloe stared into her cup for a moment before speaking again. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." She hesitated. "Did you know Mom and Dad have been talking about renovations for months?" I kept my face calm even though my stomach tightened immediately. "What kind of renovations?" Chloe looked uncomfortable now, like she regretted saying anything at all. "Mom wants to knock down the wall between the dining room and kitchen. She told Aunt Melissa the house feels old and closed off." Old and closed off. Funny how those were the same words Brittany once used to describe me. I took a slow sip of hot chocolate and let the warmth settle in my chest before answering. "I see." Chloe turned toward me quickly. "Grandma, I do not think Dad realizes how bad this looks. He just goes along with things because it is easier than arguing with Mom." I almost smiled at that because it sounded exactly like Harold used to describe Ryan when he was little. Avoid conflict. Keep everybody happy. The problem is that boys who grow into men like that often become husbands who confuse silence with kindness. "Your father has always hated disappointing people," I said quietly. Chloe looked down at her hands. "But he keeps disappointing you." Neither of us spoke for several seconds after that. Outside, snow drifted softly beneath the yellow glow of the driveway light. I remembered Ryan at 6 years old standing in this very garage wearing oversized mittens while Harold helped him build a wooden birdhouse for school. He had looked up at me with sawdust all over his cheeks and said, "One day I am going to take care of this house just like Dad." Back then I believed him completely. The door to the garage suddenly opened again and Brittany appeared holding her phone in one hand. Her smile tightened slightly when she saw us sitting together. There you are, she said brightly to Chloe. Everybody is looking for you. We are taking family photos by the tree. Chloe did not move right away. Grandma should be in the pictures, too. Brittany laughed softly as though the suggestion were adorable but impractical. Oh, Evelyn looked tired. Besides, there are not enough seats left near the tree. Not enough seats. In a house with 25 extra guests, somehow there still was no room left for me. Chloe stared at her mother for a long moment before standing slowly. I will be there in a minute. Brittany nodded and disappeared back into the noise without another glance at me. The garage fell quiet again. Chloe looked embarrassed now, almost angry on my behalf. But strangely, I no longer felt angry myself. Just clear. Clear in the way winter mornings become clear after a storm finally passes. I looked around Harold's garage one more time and realized something important. The people inside that house were already acting like owners. The only problem was they had forgotten to ask who actually held the keys. The house finally grew quiet a little after midnight. One by one the lights turned off downstairs until only the Christmas tree still glowed faintly through the living room window. I remained awake in the guest room listening to pipes creak softly inside the walls while snow tapped gently against the glass. Sleep would not come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Brittany's voice again. Smaller places for seniors. Not cruel enough to sound shocking. Just practical enough to sound reasonable. That was always her talent. She never raised her voice. Never openly insulted me. She simply rearranged people's lives until they no longer recognized their place in them. Around 1 a.m, I finally got out of bed and slipped quietly downstairs for water. The hardwood floor felt cold beneath my feet as I passed the dark dining room. Wrapping paper still covered the table. Half-empty wine glasses sat abandoned beside melting candles. Someone had left gravy stains on my white linen tablecloth, the one Harold's mother embroidered by hand back in 1978. I touched the fabric gently and remembered ironing that cloth every Christmas Eve while Harold hung lights outside with Ryan. We used to laugh so much in this house. Now every room felt heavy with people who treated it like a vacation rental. As I entered the kitchen, I stopped when I heard low voices coming from the den. Brittany and her mother were still awake. The doorway stood slightly open, warm light spilling across the hallway floor. I am telling you, once Ryan gets ownership sorted out, the value of this property will double after renovations, Brittany whispered confidently. Her mother laughed softly. And Evelyn still has no idea? She is sentimental, not suspicious, Brittany replied. Honestly, she still thinks this house belongs to memories instead of paperwork. I stood perfectly still beside the kitchen counter, one hand tightening around the edge of the marble surface. Paperwork. Ownership sorted out. Suddenly dozens of small moments from the past year returned to me all at once. Brittany asking strange questions about property taxes after Harold's funeral. Ryan requesting copies of utility bills for budgeting purposes. The afternoon Brittany casually asked where Harold kept important documents. At the time, grief had clouded everything around me. I had mistaken curiosity for concern. Well, her mother said carefully, you should make sure everything is finalized before Evelyn changes her mind about living arrangements. Brittany laughed quietly again. Trust me, Ryan will handle her. He always does. I did not wait to hear anything else. I walked silently back upstairs before either woman noticed me standing there. My hands no longer trembled now. In fact, I felt strangely steady for the first time all weekend. There comes a moment when pain stops feeling sharp and starts feeling cold instead. Clean. Precise. Like stepping outside into winter air after sitting too close to a fire. Back in the guest room, I opened the top drawer of the nightstand and removed my phone. For several seconds I stared at Harold's old lawyer's number still saved in my contacts under Martin Keller. I had not called Martin since the reading of Harold's will 8 months earlier. At the time I could barely survive conversations longer than 5 minutes without crying. But tonight something inside me had shifted. I quietly slipped on my robe, walked downstairs once more and entered the garage. The motion sensor light flickered on above Harold's workbench. I knelt beside the old green filing cabinet, hidden beneath shelves of paint cans, and opened the bottom drawer carefully. Right where Harold left them sat the house documents inside a thick brown folder. Trust papers. Property records. Insurance files. I ran my fingers slowly across Harold's handwriting on the label. Then I opened the folder and began reading beneath the cold garage light, while the rest of my family slept peacefully inside a house they already believed belonged to them. The garage was colder than I realized once the furnace inside the house finally shut down for the night. I wrapped Harold's old flannel jacket tighter around my shoulders and sat at his workbench reading page after page beneath the harsh yellow light overhead. Outside, snow continued falling softly across the driveway. The world looked peaceful through the frosted windows. Inside me, however, something was quietly rearranging itself. I had spent months believing grief was the heaviest thing a woman could carry. I was wrong. Betrayal weighs far more because grief mourns what is gone, while betrayal destroys what is still standing. The trust documents rested open in front of me beside Harold's reading glasses. My husband had always been meticulous with paperwork. Every page sat perfectly organized in labeled folders with dates typed neatly across the top. Harold used to joke that if he died first, I would never need to search for anything longer than 30 seconds. I remember scolding him every time he made those jokes. Now I sat alone at 2 in the morning silently thanking him for thinking ahead. I carefully turned another page and stopped breathing for a moment. The house had never been transferred to Ryan. Not partially. Not conditionally. Not eventually. Harold had placed everything into a protected family trust 6 years earlier after one of Ryan and Brittany's business ventures collapsed under debt. I remembered that period now. The expensive vacations. The luxury SUV they could not afford. Brittany insisting success required looking successful. Harold had worried constantly that Ryan was too eager to impress people. Our son has a good heart, he told me once, but good hearts can still be manipulated. Back then I defended Brittany every time. Tonight those words echoed differently inside my mind. According to the trust, I remained sole lifetime beneficiary and full residential controller of the property. No sale. No renovation. No transfer could happen without my direct written approval. After my death, ownership would pass equally between Ryan and Chloe. I stared at the papers for a very long time. Not because I was shocked. Somehow deep down I think part of me already knew Harold would never leave me vulnerable. No, what stunned me was realizing how confidently Brittany had been building plans around something she never actually possessed. I leaned back slowly in Harold's old chair and closed my eyes for a moment. Upstairs, 25 people slept peacefully beneath my roof while discussing my future like I was an aging neighbor they barely knew. Somewhere inside the house Brittany probably believed she was already winning. That thought should have made me angry. Instead it made me tired. Deeply tired. Around 3 o'clock I quietly returned the papers to the folder and locked the filing cabinet again. Then I sat alone in the garage staring at Harold's fishing rods hanging against the wall. I suddenly remembered a conversation from last winter before he got sick. We had been sitting at the kitchen table after Ryan and Brittany left one evening. Harold looked unusually quiet while stirring cream into his coffee. "Promise me something," he said eventually. "If people ever stop treating you with kindness in this house, do not stay out of guilt." I laughed at the time because the idea seemed impossible. This was our family, our son, our home. But Harold simply reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "Some people confuse your patience with permission, Evelyn." Sitting there now months later, I finally understood exactly what he meant. My phone screen glowed softly beside me on the workbench. Martin Keller's number still waited in my contacts. At 3:15 in the morning, I finally pressed call. To my surprise, Martin answered after only 2 rings, his voice groggy but alert. "Evelyn?" he asked immediately. "Is everything all right?" I looked through the garage window toward the house where warm Christmas lights still flickered faintly in the darkness. Then I spoke calmly, more calmly than I had felt in months. "Martin," I said quietly, "I think it is time I reviewed every detail of Harold's trust." Christmas morning arrived gray and silent after the overnight snowstorm. For the first time in years, I woke before everyone else without feeling anxious about breakfast or presents, or whether the cinnamon rolls would rise properly. Instead I dressed slowly in a cream-colored sweater Harold once bought me in Vermont and tied my silver hair back neatly in the mirror. Downstairs the house still slept beneath piles of blankets and scattered wrapping paper. The silence felt temporary, fragile. Like a stage before actors return for the next performance. I moved quietly through the kitchen making coffee only for myself. Outside the windows, snow covered the backyard in untouched white layers nearly 6 inches deep. Harold used to love mornings like this. He always said fresh snow made the world look honest again. At 7:30 sharp, my phone rang softly against the countertop. Martin Keller. "Good morning, Evelyn," he said gently after I answered. "I reviewed everything before dawn. You were correct to call me." I stared out the kitchen window while steam rose from my coffee cup. "Tell me plainly, Martin." He did not hesitate. "Nobody can alter ownership of that property while you are alive. Legally speaking, the house remains entirely under your control through the trust Harold established." A strange calm settled deeper inside me hearing the words spoken aloud. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just certainty. Martin continued carefully. "There is something else you should know. Harold included a protective clause regarding residency and misuse of the property. If you feel pressured or displaced inside your own home, you have full authority to remove any non-approved occupants immediately." I closed my eyes briefly. Remove occupants. Such cold legal words for people I once called family. "Thank you, Martin," I said quietly. "I may need your help today." "I expected as much," he replied softly. Around 8 o'clock the house finally began waking up. Doors opened upstairs. Children ran through hallways. Someone turned on Christmas music far too loudly. Brittany entered the kitchen wearing silk pajamas and stopped when she saw me calmly drinking coffee at the table. For a brief second she looked almost uneasy, perhaps because I no longer appeared tired or emotional. "Merry Christmas," she said brightly. "We are making pancakes for everyone. Oh, and my brother invited 2 more cousins over later today if that is okay." 2 more cousins. I almost smiled at the absurdity of asking permission only after the invasion had already happened. "No," I answered calmly. Brittany blinked. "No." I folded my napkin carefully beside my plate. "No more guests, Brittany." Her expression shifted slightly, though she quickly recovered. "Well, they are already planning to come. Then they should change their plans." The kitchen grew very quiet then except for the faint sound of Bing Crosby drifting from the living room speakers. Brittany stared at me like she no longer recognized the woman sitting across from her. Maybe she did not. Ryan entered moments later still half asleep, rubbing his eyes. "What is going on?" Brittany crossed her arms immediately. "Your mother is suddenly making rules about guests." Ryan sighed heavily the same way people do when they believe someone else is creating unnecessary tension. "Mom, it is Christmas. Can we not do this today?" I looked at my son carefully. Really looked at him. The tired eyes. The permanent uncertainty in his expression. The way he always positioned himself beside Brittany even before understanding the conversation. "Do what, Ryan?" I asked softly. "Acknowledge that this is still my home?" He opened his mouth but said nothing. For the first time all weekend, I watched discomfort flicker openly across his face. Brittany stepped forward before he could respond. "Nobody is trying to disrespect you, Evelyn." "No," I said quietly. "You are simply trying to erase me politely." Her face hardened instantly after that. There it was. The real Brittany. Beneath the rehearsed smiles and perfect manners. Ryan looked between us nervously. "Mom, please." I stood slowly from the kitchen table and carried my empty coffee cup to the sink. Then I turned back toward them both with more peace in my chest than I had felt in months. "Martin Keller will be arriving at noon," I said calmly. "I think it is time we all discussed exactly who this house belongs to." By 11:45 the atmosphere inside the house had changed completely. Nobody said it out loud but everyone felt it. The music had been turned lower. Conversations sounded careful now, uneven. Brittany moved through the kitchen smiling too brightly while pretending nothing was wrong, but I noticed how often she checked the clock above the stove. Ryan looked pale all morning. Twice I caught him staring at me like he wanted to speak privately but could not find the courage. Funny how courage always arrives late in families like ours. Around noon sharp, the front doorbell rang. The entire living room went quiet for half a second. I stood slowly from Harold's armchair before anyone else could move and opened the door myself. Martin Keller stood on the porch holding a leather briefcase beneath one arm, while snow dusted the shoulders of his dark wool coat. He had aged since Harold's funeral. More gray hair. deeper lines around his eyes. But his expression softened immediately when he saw me. "Merry Christmas, Evelyn," he said gently. "Merry Christmas, Martin." I stepped aside and invited him in. The room fell almost completely silent as he entered. Brittany stood frozen beside the dining table, clutching a coffee mug with both hands. Ryan looked confused now rather than defensive, like a man slowly realizing he had misunderstood something important for a very long time. Martin removed his gloves carefully and glanced around the crowded living room. "Quite a gathering," he said politely. Nobody answered. I led him toward the dining room while 25 nervous guests suddenly found intense interest in their phones, desserts, and football games. Martin opened his briefcase calmly and placed several folders on the table beside the Christmas centerpiece I had arranged. 3 days earlier. Red candles. Pine branches. Tiny silver bells. The decorations suddenly looked strangely formal beside legal paperwork. "I reviewed Harold Harper's trust documentation this morning," Martin began professionally. Brittany immediately interrupted with a brittle smile. "I really do not think legal business is necessary during the holidays." Martin looked at her politely over his glasses. "Actually, Mrs. Harper, it became necessary the moment discussions regarding property ownership and residential control began occurring without the trustee present." Brittany's smile disappeared instantly. Ryan looked between us in confusion. "Wait, what discussions?" I said nothing. Martin simply opened the top folder and slid several papers across the table toward Ryan. "Your father established an irrevocable family trust 6 years ago. Your mother retains complete lifetime authority over this property. No transfer of ownership can occur without her direct written approval." Ryan stared down at the paperwork without speaking. Brittany stepped closer quickly. "That cannot be right. Harold told us eventually the house would become Ryan's." Martin nodded calmly. "Eventually, yes. After Evelyn's passing, ownership divides equally between Ryan Harper and Chloe Harper." The room became very still after that. Brittany's face lost color so quickly it startled me. "Equally?" she repeated softly. Martin adjusted another document on the table. "Additionally, the trust includes a residential protection clause. Evelyn Harper maintains exclusive authority regarding approved long-term occupants inside the property." Ryan finally looked up from the papers toward me. "Mom, you knew about this?" His voice sounded small suddenly, younger somehow. I met his eyes calmly across the table. "Your father wanted to make sure I would always feel safe in my own home." Brittany crossed her arms tightly. "This is ridiculous. We are family." Martin closed the folder carefully before answering. "Families generally do not discuss removing someone from their own house while she is still alive." Nobody spoke after that. Somewhere in the living room a child laughed at the television completely, unaware that the entire balance inside the house had just shifted. Ryan slowly sat down at the dining table and rubbed both hands across his face. For the first time all weekend, he looked directly at me without Brittany standing between us. "Mom," he said quietly, "why did you not say something sooner?" I looked around the room then, at the strangers sleeping in my home, at Harold's displaced chair, at the half-packed boxes of decorations Brittany already planned to replace after the holidays. Then I answered honestly, "Because I kept hoping you would remember I was your mother before I had to remind you I was the owner." The house emptied faster than I expected after that conversation. By sunset, suitcases rolled across hardwood floors while uncomfortable goodbyes drifted through the hallways. Brittany's relatives suddenly remembered long drives home, early work meetings, children needing naps. Funny how quickly people leave once a place no longer feels free. I stood quietly near the front window watching headlights disappear one by one through the falling snow. Nobody argued with me directly. Nobody apologized either. Most avoided eye contact altogether as they gathered coats and leftovers and hurried toward their cars. Brittany barely spoke the rest of the afternoon. She moved stiffly through the house with red eyes and tight shoulders, furious not because she had been cruel but because she had miscalculated. Ryan looked worse. He wandered from room to room helping people carry luggage without saying much at all. Twice I caught him staring at Harold's old photographs like he was trying to remember something about himself he had misplaced years ago. By 8 o'clock the house finally grew quiet again. Real quiet. The kind I had not heard since before Christmas Eve. Paper plates were gone. Extra air mattresses disappeared. Empty wine bottles no longer crowded the counters. I slowly walked through each room, turning off lights one at a time while soft snow continued falling outside. In the living room, the Christmas tree still glowed beside the fireplace exactly the way Harold used to leave it every night before bed. For the first time all weekend I could hear the ticking clock above the mantel again. Ryan found me there around 9. He stood awkwardly near the hallway with both hands buried in his pockets like a nervous teenager. "Mom." I looked over gently. "Yes." He swallowed hard before speaking. "I did not realize things had gotten this bad for you." I studied my son quietly beneath the warm tree lights. He looked exhausted now. Smaller somehow. "That is because you stopped looking a long time ago." The truth landed visibly across his face. He sat down slowly on the edge of the sofa and rubbed his hands together. "I thought keeping everyone happy was the same thing as keeping peace." I almost smiled sadly at that because it sounded exactly like something Harold once warned him about. "Peace built on silence is not peace, Ryan." He nodded faintly without arguing. After a long pause he finally whispered, "Are you going to make us leave?" I looked around the room carefully before answering. Harold's chair stood back in its proper place beside the lamp. The family photos Brittany packed away months earlier sat stacked neatly on the coffee table after Chloe found them hidden upstairs. The house already felt different tonight, like it could breathe again. "No," I said softly. "I am not forcing anyone out." Ryan looked relieved for half a second until I continued speaking. "But things will change." He lowered his eyes immediately because deep down he already understood. Boundaries. Respect. Distance. The things families should never need lawyers to explain. A few minutes later Chloe came downstairs carrying a cardboard box filled with Christmas ornaments Brittany had removed from storage last year because they looked old-fashioned. Without saying anything, Chloe sat beside me on the floor and began hanging them carefully on the tree one by one. Tiny wooden angels Ryan made in elementary school. Crocheted snowflakes from Harold's mother. A faded ornament shaped like a fishing boat from our trip to Maine 30 years ago. Memory after memory returning quietly to its rightful place. Ryan watched us silently from the couch before eventually kneeling beside Chloe to help. None of us spoke much after that. We did not need to. Sometimes healing begins not with grand apologies but with small acts of remembering. Near midnight, after everyone finally went upstairs, I remained alone beside the tree for a little while longer. Snow covered the backyard in silver moonlight beyond the windows. The house felt peaceful again. Not perfect. Not untouched by damage. But peaceful. I rested my hand lightly against one of Harold's old ornaments and smiled softly into the quiet room. For the first time since losing him, this house no longer felt like the place where I was slowly disappearing. It finally felt like home again.